We're going to start this morning around 8:30 with Scott from CTA. We'll do an intro for him. We also have Ward on the line from IPTA. And then we will, at 9:30, we will have our Iowa congressional delegation. Please note, for each of these separate meetings, we are using the same Zoom link. So if you need to jump out, jump back in, please know it's the exact same link, exact same password. Also note that just do some other items. We also have 11 o'clock after our congressional delegation, we will have Joel from the Iowa Bus Coalition come talk to us a little bit about what's going on, update there. Tomorrow, Monday, we have a little bit of a continuation of our Washington, DC fly-in, and that's our meeting with FTA. And so just due to some scheduling changes, we had to modify some things and move that to a Monday. So sorry that was done last minute, but we wanted to try to accommodate the acting administrator so we could meet. And so we will be doing that again at 2:15 with the same Zoom link. With that, I would like to get started and introduce Scott. Scott has been with the Community Transportation Association of America. Usually, Scott, I wouldn't even introduce because everyone knows you, but we have a lot of new people joining us for the first time on this type of meeting. So go a little bit more, but for those of you that may this new time for you, I know that Scott serves as the executive director for CTA and has done so since 2016. He's a passionate transit advocate, and of course, even prior to COVID-19, was a daily transit user. His work has always focused on building and promoting safe and affordable and accessible and inclusive mobility for all Americans. Proud graduate of Indiana University journalism program, Scott lives in Maryland with his wife, Beth. Thank you so much, as always. Crowd favorite to be here today, Scott. I'll let you kind of take it away.
Thanks, Carl. And I got to tell you, I like the bow tie. That's a quality look you've got going today.
It's always distinctive. Everyone remembers the guy in the bow tie.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so used to having this meeting over at the Capitol Hill Visitors Center. It seems odd for us not to have all been gathered there, but it's great to have a good group, and it's an important time. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to be done, and really, as Ward will I'm sure emphasize in his remarks, there are a lot of really important opportunities in front of all of us in public and community transportation right now that we need to take advantage of. And this is as busy and as kind of traffic, to use a transit metaphor, so many different issues on the table right now. So I've got a quick PowerPoint that I'm going to run through, and if you have any questions, throw them in the chat box or unmute yourself and interrupt me and fire away. I'm happy to have that dialogue. Let's see here. So the obvious first issue that we're all looking at is the stimulus funds. And Ward and I, we did this basic session less than 2 days ago for California. So I know what's in his presentation, and I don't want to talk over it because there's a lot of good information in there. But really, in the aftermath and in the middle still of, or towards the end game of the pandemic, we've had 3 different emergency appropriations bills that have now fully gone through the Congress and signed into law. CARES Act last March, CRISA, and there's not 2 S's in that. That's my haste in putting this together. That was done and signed and finished at the end of December. And now the American Rescue Plan. Total $70 billion coming into public transportation off budget in 11 months. So I want you just all of you let that sink in. And consider that a normal appropriation cycle is about 12 to 13 billion, and you get a sense of the amount of money that's been allocated to public transportation to get us through this pandemic. And Thank goodness for it. It's allowed us to remain whole, not lose wholesale our staffs, and be ready as we are currently to provide some real essential services. Your message you're going to get tomorrow or Monday from the FTA is they are very concerned about how fast it can be spent. And this is an interesting issue that I really hope you guys, as folks serving the state of Iowa, can emphasize with the FTA is just because you're not spending it like it's burning a hole in your pocket does not mean it's not important to you. And they tend, and Congress to a certain extent as well, they tend to kind of evaluate need based on how fast you're spending, particularly the CARES Act funds, which was 25 billion. The CRISA funds were about 14, and then the American Rescue Plan was another 30 billion dollars. We need them to understand that you are looking at the longer period of economic recovery from the pandemic. We need them to understand that there are very real implications for state and local funding and your local share that are going to last a while when it comes to recovery from this pandemic. And just because you're not spending it all in 2 or 3 months does not mean it isn't important and it won't be used. So I just want to encourage you to really emphasize that with FTA, because that's Trump, and their concerns are Congress is coming to them saying, hey, how come these folks aren't spending this quickly enough? And the other thing I said here, spending plans. If you as an agency have worked up a plan on how you intend to, over a period of time, expend these funds, share that with FTA. They need to see that. I just can't emphasize that more. So let's look at the stimulus funds from a broad perspective. This is kind of how it's all played out. Of that 70 billion, 80% has gone to UZAs, urbanized areas, over 1 million population. 10% has gone to mid-sized UZAs, so that's going to be folks between 200,000 and 1 million. 5% for small urbans between 50,000 and 200,000, 5% for rural, and that little sliver is 5310, in which the last two bills, CRISA and the American Rescue Plan, we were able to secure $100 million total in stimulus funding. So, that's the other thing to remind. Rural is 5% of the total. So when we're talking about how fast things are being spent, you're not always the issue. The urban 95% is probably more the issue. But I wanted you just to see this is how the funds played out. And to kind of get a sense from the rural perspective on Iowa itself, I wanted to show you, Iowa fits here. Now, that means the total amount of funds when you add CARES, CRISA, and the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, together. Iowa did well, largely because you were one of the few states that received rural transit funds in all 3 programs. 28 states didn't get anything in the second one. But what do these numbers mean? How do we put them into context? Well, the next slide, I think, does that. And what I tried to do here was show how do we compare what Iowa received in those 3 programs against what it normally would receive in its FY21 5311 apportionment. This is the number of times greater than that annual apportionment. So yes, Delaware receives 16 times its normal rural apportionment in those 3 programs. Iowa, you find here, is somewhere closer to the average. No state did worse than 3 times their normal appropriation. So, everyone did well. Some states did extraordinarily well, largely due to very strange formulas when it came to the rural funding in the CRISA, that second of the three programs, was a formula that I don't understand for rural. It made perfect sense for urban. It made no sense for rural, other than, I think, members of Congress, and Ward probably knows this better than I. They understood what they were doing for urban and said, well, we have to use the same construct for rural, just so we're treating the two the same. And again, you guys know there's a big difference between what rural and what urban looks like. And so that formula made no sense to me. It made great sense if you're Washington State and you're now receiving 14 times your normal annual appropriations in 11 months. But these things come along with problems too, which is, Washington State's state funding being looked at and saying, well, geez, you got all this money at 100% federal. Do we need to keep giving you state funds? So there are equal and opposite reactions to all of this. That's the state of play. I don't believe we're going to see any more rural stimulus funds. I do think there could be a small tranche of funds in the reauthorization bill for the big urbans once again. I don't know that they're done. I think rural's largely done. And in recent discussions with authorizers, I kind of alluded to, if they could reduce or continue 100% federal for some out years for rural systems in the reauthorization, that would probably be a more welcome outcome than just throwing more money, where I think that would make sense. So that's kind of where we are on this off budget emergency appropriations that has helped transit kind of get through the pandemic. FAST Act. So last year it was extended for another year. That ends September 30th. We are in a period where reauthorization is well underway. The House, they're going to use the HR2 invest as a baseline. They're saying they're going to mark up in May. That may be optimistic, but that's their goal. And so I would encourage you, look at what we produced, and I'll put it in the chat box, a link to it so you can get it when I'm done here, with all the numbers that were in the Invest Act. Look at its treatment. For example, I know an important issue for many of our Iowa members has been charter bus regs, and there is some change in those regs that I think you'll like. Look at what was in Invest, consider that as the baseline, and let your members know that you're going to be meeting with what you like in that, what you really want to see carried forward in that House bill. The important things to you: 5311 funds, 5307 funds, bus funding. Major increases in all of those are in that bill, and guaranteeing it for five years. On the Senate side, the Environment and Public Works Committee does the highway title, which is the bigger of the titles. That is underway. They think a May markup. They were able to get a bill through that committee in a pretty bipartisan fashion last year. Banking Committee that does the transit title is behind. That's not new, but they're thinking maybe this summer. And then there's this administration-led infrastructure title push that they're talking about $3 trillion, and how that would play into all of this, again, is a very unique situation, one that CTA and IPTA, AASHTO for the state DOTs are currently, obviously looking very closely at. Joel, who's going to talk later from the Bus Coalition, has, I think, some educated theories about ways he thinks that can play out. I would make sure you engage him on those. None of us know for sure But all of these are pointing to those major opportunities that I brought up in the beginning. We are working towards a place where we're going to grow transit here. The question is right now, can we get it done in this window, which is important, and how much will we be able to grow it? That's a good place to be, particularly coming on the heels of all of that COVID stimulus funds. It's going to put a lot of you in interesting positions funding wise that you may not have been in the past, having to make decisions about what do I spend first and how much of this can I shift over to capital now, and what are my, a lot of issues that you're going to have to take up. Will help. We're designing some training around some of those issues that we're going to be rolling out. Obviously the state DOT, you guys have a good working relationship with them. They're going to be critical from the rural perspective. And it's going to be a really interesting time. So some other issues, NEMT. Yeah, you guys were critical. Carl, many thanks for how you stepped up and worked with Senator Grassley and his staff. The fact that we were able to get NEMT codified in the Medicaid statutes constitutes 25 years of work to get that done. And to get it over the goal line at the end of December was gratifying. We couldn't have done it without the Iowa members. On the other side, we didn't get transit, I think, as emphasized as we would have liked. We were able to get it in there and get it in there in a way that I think will work for us. But in talking to members of Senate Banking Committee, they viewed it as just a first step. And I do believe you've probably spoken in the past with Homer Carlisle on the Senate Banking Committee. Homer definitely wants to, in reauthorization, figure out if there are ways to push the public transit role in Medicaid NEMT to a greater place, one that I think you'd probably all like to see. So as that gets worked on, I'm sure I'll be in touch with the association, with Ed, with Carl, and with you guys directly. But consider that in the reauthorization, I do expect to see some opportunities to strengthen the language on a public transit basis. And I think that's important, not just for the rurals, but for the urbans as well, because as we've seen in Des Moines, where we get too many folks that are just dumped into complementary paratransit that ought to be really in these kinds of programs, it can have a negative impact on the budgets for urbans as well. So the more we can work forward on this, the better. And then some other issues that I just wanted to raise before we kind of open up the floor to some discussion. We've got the census. CTA has you all know Chris Zeilinger, and you probably also would figure that no one enjoys the census more than Chris, and getting into the absolute, it's not even the weeds, it's like the weeds of the weeds. But Chris put together, I asked him to look at the Federal Register notice of about 3 weeks ago, where the Census Bureau for the first time kind of addressed what they're expecting to do and asked for input. And you've heard that phrase, no good deed goes unpunished. Chris's response was no fewer than 20 pages. That is now published on our website. You can download it. I'll put a link in the chat to that as well. But it's important. It's important to look at what rural areas potentially could get moved into urban areas, both small urban and even large urban. What small urbans could move into large urban? What's going to be the impact of a census count in Ames in Iowa City when the students weren't there? And is that legitimate? Do we really get an accurate count? And can we be sure to keep those two, particularly Ames, in that small urbanized area where it can then and can Barbara can then avail herself of stick funds, which, if you're not a small urban, are not there for you. So there's a lot of implications to the census that bear keeping an eye on. And then the last kind of other issue is, ta-da, earmarks are back. Certainly in the House, the Senate hasn't done anything yet, but I think Ward mentioned in our meeting a couple nights ago, he expects some traction in the Senate as well. And two different types of earmarks: appropriations earmarks and earmarks that would be dropped into the reauthorization. So, all this is going on right now. So a lot to do, a lot to pay attention to. It's a good time for you to be reconnecting with your electeds. You guys do great work at that. You always have. Thanks for taking some of your time to focus on this. And I want you to keep in mind this. We have a window right now to deal with some of these issues, particularly reauthorization. The margins are razor thin in the House and the Senate. The processes they're using to try to get things done are really reliant upon very thin margins. We've got an election in 2022, and that will change things potentially. And we've just spent trillions of dollars off budget, adding to the deficit to get the country through this terrible pandemic. If we can't get reauthorization done in this window, and suddenly we're trying to get it done when those razor thin margins are different, we're trying to get it done when the buyer's remorse of all of this spending, necessary spending to my perspective, and I think Ward would agree, necessary spending, but massive spending nonetheless, when the buyer's remorse kicks in, it's going to get difficult to get a good bill done. And now, the administration has a lot of momentum on infrastructure. And again, how long will they have that momentum? So this window's opening. It's critical to engage with your members and for all of us to pull in the same direction. CTA, IPTA, AASHTO, and all the other folks working on surface transportation, the bus coalition, all of us to work together to try to maximize our effectiveness in this window to get this done, because I've been doing this a long time. Ward's been doing it a long time. And the out years and where we could be headed is I don't want to waste this opportunity. And so, as much as it is in our control, and a lot of it isn't, but the parts that are in our control, let's make sure we get those done and done right. And these kinds of meetings that you're having today are critical to that. So with that, Carl, I'll stop my share and open up the floor for any discussion. I can hang around until 9:30 your time. So if you want to just have Ward go and then maybe both of us answer questions at the end, I'm fine with that too.
I would say let's go ahead and have Ward go, and then we'll have questions. That way, it'll just give us a little buffer before we meet with our congressional delegation here.
Awesome, that works for me.
Sounds good. Well, Ward, if you're ready, we do have Ward, who manages IPTA's lobbying efforts on the federal legislative issues that affect public transit industry on Capitol Hill. He's been in this position for a few years now. In that capacity, he oversees the industry efforts on the federal budget, annual appropriations process, multi-year surface transportation authorization bills, security tax, energy and environmental legislation, and measures that affect public transit. He also serves as staff advisor to IPTA's legislative committee, if any of you guys are on that. Before joining IPTA in 2018, Ward served as Majority Minority Chief Counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Transportation Infrastructure for over 20 years. And prior to that, served on the Subcommittee on Surface Transportation and Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings. In these roles, he's been directly involved in negotiating, drafting, and supporting each of the public transit titles of the surface transportation legislation, starting with the Transportation Equity Act in the 21st century, and also up to including Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, the FAST Act. He's earned his JD from University of Wisconsin Law School and a Bachelor of Arts from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ward is great. I met you when we were actually in person a couple of years ago here, but thank you for joining us this morning. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, both you and Ed, and for everything that IPTA does on behalf of advocacy for public transit. We really appreciate it. And it's always great to be with Midwesterners and kind of get back to my roots, even virtually. Alicia, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, you're going to help me with the slides. So if you can go ahead and next slide. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I definitely want to leave time for questions at the end. And I think Scott hit many of the high points. So I think that the big difference we saw in January was, new president, suddenly a surprising Democratic majority in the Senate that for us, I think opened a different opportunity. We had been seeking this transit emergency relief a few months at a time. That was as much as we could be getting through Congress. And we saw this unique opportunity to just try to stabilize the industry for several years. And so we went big and we proposed, we had received $39 billion in 2020, as Scott highlighted, through the CARES Act and CRISA. And then as we did an independent economic analysis that defined that there was an additional $39 billion of need. So that became our kind of target point. Next slide. So the rescue plan, $30.5 billion for transit, just an extraordinary amount of investment, $1.7 billion for Amtrak. And it's split really into three key categories. Formula grants, there's a more than $2 billion emergency discretionary grant program, and then $1.7 billion for CIG projects. But the overwhelming majority, almost $27 billion, is through the formula grant program. Next slide. So as a general rule, the funds, except for the CIG funds, are for operating expenses, 100% federal share. Under the rescue plan, these funds are available through 2024. Now, that is unlike the CARES Act and CRISA. Those funds are what we would term no-year funds. They're available until expended. These funds do have an expiration date, so you need to get them obligated by 2024. So I think we would urge you to put all these funds to work as soon as possible and get them obligated. But you may want to consider whether you prioritize the rescue plan funds to ensure that you meet that deadline, particularly if you have any longer term plans for any of these COVID relief funds. Next slide. So the funds are basically broken on the formula side into three main categories: urbanized area, rural, and seniors with disabilities. Overwhelming majority goes to the urbanized areas. They are set up under the statute that they shall be directed to payroll and operations unless the agency certifies that it has not furloughed any of its employees. And this requirement now applies to the rescue plan, to CRISA, and to any remaining unobligated CARES Act funds. So I think it's kind of across the board that there is a strong preference that these funds be used for operating. But there is an opportunity that if you do a certification, you can use them for capital. Next slide. So how are the funds distributed? Under the Act, all states in urbanized areas receive formula funds. And that was a very important principle for APTA. That way, Congress kind of altered the way it approached these in different iterations. So the CARES Act was, in essence, a straight formula. I think that Congress looked at that and thought that there were some disproportionate effects there in terms of addressing what they were seeing as the primary need. And so CRISA Act was distributed differently and more focused on an operating budget for the agencies. But some agencies then, I know in Iowa, Cedar Rapids and Dubuque did not get funds under under that program, which caused its own consternation in Congress. So I think, and among our members, so I think we, felt it very important that we understood Congress's framework, but we thought it was really key that every agency have the opportunity to address its needs. So where they ended up was 132% for every urbanized area, 145% for rural areas, and then the seniors and disability program went just through the 5310 formula. Now, if you were an urbanized area that had already received 132% through the CARES Act, you did get some additional funds just to ensure that everyone did benefit through the program. Next slide. So in addition, there is a more than $2 billion emergency discretionary grant program. These funds are only available for operating assistance, and there are very specific requirements in the statute as to what applicants have to include in their applications and how FTA should evaluate them. So I think this is a great opportunity, but I think it's really an opportunity if you're an agency that is going to be well positioned to show that the formula funds you received have not addressed your COVID needs. I think if you really can't make that case, it will be harder to receive these through this process. I wouldn't discourage you from applying, but I think there are some pretty tight requirements. And I think when we see FTA put out a notice on this, it's worth taking a hard look as to how will you fare in a discretionary process, because it requires that you provide estimates of your financial need, data on the reduced fare box or other local revenue, that you provide a spend plan for the funds, and that you demonstrate that you've expended 90% of your CARES Act fund. So this, I'm at least reading this, we haven't seen the notice yet, but the statute says expenditure, it doesn't say obligate. So they want to know that you've actually gotten that money out the door, you've been reimbursed, that money is gone from the CARES Act. And then it requires FTA to evaluate these applications based on the level of financial need demonstrated. And lastly, the Act requires FTA to issue its notice of funding opportunity within 180 days and make decisions within 120 days thereafter. So there are kind of very specific timelines for how quickly FTA must proceed with this program. Next slide. So the third major piece of the funding is there is some specific capital funding in the Act. Almost $1.7 billion for specific CIG projects. The overwhelming majority is that for new starts and core capacity. It provides the funds proportionally to 23 projects that are under construction but not yet open for revenue service, who've seen kind of these revenue losses at the local side that are affecting their ability to continue to construct the projects. And then in addition, there's $250 million for small starts. Statute's much less specific there. I expect FTA will announce a discretionary process for that, but that will be for projects that have already received funds or are in the current CIG pipeline. Next slide. So this is my favorite slide. This is the outcome over the last year. Comparing the surface transportation modes, Amtrak, highways, public transit. And we did extraordinarily well, and that's a tribute to you and all of APTA's members in terms of the ability to show the essential lifeline and the role that we play in terms of the community social fabric. and make that case for the need for these funds. You know, for Des Moines, that number, I think when you see the apportionments, which I hope for the rescue plan will come out next week, Des Moines will end up with probably close to $40 million. Davenport 36, Ames $14 million over the year. Those are extraordinary ways to help the industry stabilize through the pandemic period. But at the same time, the other side of this coin is there are critics of transit look at this and say this is completely out of whack. Transit got 70 billion, highways only got 10 billion. You know, this was not an easy lift. And I think as we think about going forward, it's important to recognize there are people who are chafing about this outcome. You know, in the T&I committee, House Transportation Committee, when it marked up this bill, the rescue plan, there are 27 amendments to eliminate, cut, or transfer these funds. On the House and Senate floors, the very first amendment, the one amendment they filed on the House floor, they got to offer one amendment. It was a transit amendment to cut a transit project from the bill. On the Senate floor, it was the very first amendment filed, was to eliminate the transit funding. Of everything in the $1.9 trillion bill, the very first amendment filed was to strike the transit funding. So we beat them all back. We were able to achieve this great victory, but this was never a slam dunk. This was a 3-point shot to send you to the Sweet 16. Next slide. So where do we go from here? Kind of what is APTA's action plan? Thank you, senators and representatives, for the COVID funding. Now, I think the messages are a little different with Republicans and Democrats. No Republicans supported the rescue plan. I would not emphasize that in discussions with them, and I know that's a big part of the Iowa delegation. I would talk more generally about the importance of COVID funding over the entire year. I think with Democrats, and you're one member of the delegation, I think emphasizing the rescue plan completely makes sense. As Scott made clear, put the funding to work now. I think it is critically important, partly because the rescue plan was not bipartisan. There will be critics who are looking to show that this money was not needed or that it was wasted. So tell your story of the difference it makes at the local community. And then get ready for the infrastructure bill. Next slide. So this is the current breakdown in Congress. It is absolutely evenly split. I mean, everyone knows the Senate is 50-50, but the House is, because there are even 3 Democrats right now who joined the administration, you do not see these kind of margins between either the House or Senate where it is absolutely evenly split. That might lead to bipartisanship. It might lead to more partisanship. I don't think it's clear at this point how this plays out. But as we think about both the way that the rescue plan played out and the infrastructure bill, you've got to think about this context of, do they pursue bipartisanship? Or if Democrats want to go really big and move quickly, will they be able to achieve that in a bipartisan effort? And I think those are some of the things we'll see play out over the next 6 to 8 months. Next slide. So Scott mentioned kind of the deficit. So that, I think, is one, probably the major hurdle of the discussion about how do you reach an agreement here, a bipartisan agreement between the two parties, is there's a renewed focus among Republicans about the size of the deficit and the growing deficit. And at the same time, there does not seem to be, at least from the leadership, any willingness to discuss tax increases for corporations or other entities to pay for an infrastructure bill. And it's hard to see, if Democrats are insistent on a big infrastructure bill, how you bridge that gap. And this is, from the surface transportation standpoint, this is kind of the crux that has been the difficulty over decades now, in that the gas tax hasn't been increased since 1993. We can all remember, to the extent that you all were alive, we can remember how long ago that was. Looking at the Highway Trust Fund, just to fund the current levels takes $75 billion over the next 5 years for the overall trust fund for highways and transit. That's to fund current levels. Doesn't include $1 of increases that anyone's talking about. So I think the key questions are, will Congress pay for a bill? How will they pay for it? Can you reach bipartisan agreement in doing that? I think that's a very tough question to resolve. But I think it seems that where Democrats are right now in terms of their thinking, you're hearing a lot of people from the leadership now talking about, well, we're going to pay for some of this infrastructure bill, not necessarily trying to come up, especially if they're talking a multi-trillion-dollar bill, something that would pay for all of it. Next slide. So how do they go forward? Again, I think you end up with this idea of bipartisanship requires 60 votes in the Senate. You need 10 Republican senators to join you on that. That's one path. I don't know that that can lead to a bill that is on the scale that the administration is talking about. And it will be hard to reach agreement on what would be the tax increases that might accompany that. And the second path is what they used on the rescue plan, which is to pursue it through what's called budget reconciliation. And you don't need to know all the details here, but I think there are a couple of key points. Is one, you can pass it with 51 votes. So 50 Democrats plus the vice president, you can pass it that way. But I think the second part, which is really important, is that there's something in the Senate known as the Byrd Rule, and it limits what kind of policy changes can go in that specific bill. You can't just take a surface transportation authorization bill and stick it in reconciliation. It becomes a very complicated process. So I think we saw a little bit of that play out on the rescue plan in terms of what could go in, what couldn't go in, how things had to be restructured to get in. It leads to a very complicated process. And then, lastly is it's often a party line vote. We saw it with the Affordable Care Act in 2010, the tax cut from 2017. We saw it just again with the rescue plan. So I think those are the key kind of concerns. I think the path forward here is we expect President Biden will probably outline his infrastructure package this coming week. He has a speech in Pittsburgh on, I think it's rumored to be Wednesday, and he will likely outline his package there. We will see a bipartisan effort begin through the committees. Both the House T&I Committee and the Senate Environment Committee, which handles the highway issues, they will proceed with that. They're hoping to mark up their bills in May. We'll see that proceed. I think the three complicating factors to in essence, a bipartisan effort going forward are resolving climate issues between the two parties. That's a hard one. That's probably achievable. The overall funding levels, because I think Democrats are thinking much bigger than Republicans, that is a more difficult one. And the most difficult is, how do you pay for this bill? What types of tax increases, if any, can be agreed upon between the two parties? And I think with that, last slide, and I think we can open it for questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I still have one more here. So where are we focused in terms of our advocacy plan? We're doing outreach to the new Congress and the Biden administration. We're seeing a lot of activity on the Hill right now. Secretary Buttigieg testified for 5 hours yesterday before the T&I committee. And you heard just about every member of that committee ask questions. And they are very focused on moving this bill forward. Second is creating champions for IPTA's recommendations. We are kind of picking out different recommendations, like restoring the bus share and things like that, and trying to create specific champions within Congress to help carry those forward. looking at new recommendations as things, to the extent things have changed. And then lastly, if APTA members, including you, are interested in seeking earmarks, really urging our members to work with their delegations right now. The timelines for those in the House are coming very quickly. So the House T&I committee process is in mid-April. The members of Congress have to submit their requests. They're prioritizing those right now. If you haven't already, get in the door. I think if you have already, make sure you're one of their top priorities. They're going to have lots of different requests. The House Appropriations Committee is also looking at earmarks. They have a different process and a different deadline, which is now the end of April. So I think the key here is you really need to be telling your story with your delegation about what you could do with certain funds if they were provided to you through congressionally directed spending. And I think with that, let me open it to questions.
Just remember, if anyone has any questions, to unmute yourself. We do have everyone muted right now. But Ward, I just was intrigued. You guys still are planning on doing your legislative outreach here, I believe, in another couple of months in person. Is that correct?
Well, I think it has changed because of the restrictions still in Washington, D.C. in terms of the ability to kind of gather in a large convention type setting. So we are having our legislative conference May 18th and 19th. The first day will be the conference itself. It will be virtual. And then the second day for APTA members, including IPTA and others, I think we are having a virtual fly-in. And so information on that will be going out probably early next week in terms of the fly-in. We did one last year, which was in the early days of Zoom. So I don't know if we'll get the same response, but having spent a whole career on Capitol Hill, I was very unsure how that would work out. And it worked out exceptionally well. We actually got a lot of members of Congress participating, I think. And we're doing meetings with our business members and our transit agencies and our transit board members, and really kind of bringing a broad element of the discussion to each individual delegation meeting.
Yeah, and just let you know, thanks to our state lobbyists and also to Ed, we were able to get in front of all of our representative, except for Axne, who we've met prior, just to get them before they started getting busy with assignments and kind of learning all the processes, stuff like that. But it was a unique opportunity to get every single one, Hinson, Feenstra, and Miller Meeks, to really talk about the process for transit, because it was quite an eye-opener compared to them being involved in state work.
Absolutely, and that's that's a key, I think, to all our advocacy is, we can do a lot from Washington, but again, having spent a career on Capitol Hill, there is nothing more important than hearing from your constituents, and that's clearly always been a hallmark of Iowa. And so I think what they hear from you is always going to be more important than what they hear from me.
Carl, I just want to thank Ward and Scott for what they've been doing this last year or so in lining up all of this coronavirus issues and getting it before Congress. Without what these guys have done, you would not see the amount of money coming back to the state today to try and deal with this issue. And all of the other things is line up for the reauthorization bill, as well as for the infrastructure bill. Once those are put together, we have in transit, we have an absolute opportunity to really hit the ball out of the park in getting federal funding, and hopefully at 100%, because for both of you, that's a big issue in a state like Iowa, to get these local funds because these local communities and counties are not coming forward with funding to help them. So the 100% has been absolutely critical to meet the needs of what we have for our systems in Iowa. And the two of you have worked so hard to get this where it is, and it's really been amazing. And seeing this on the slides that you both presented, that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of money. And you guys have done a good job of getting us to where we are today. And I know everybody here really appreciates that work. Having said that, just so you know, they're going in for a NOLO zero emission application for rural systems in this next round of funding that's coming up. So there's 16 buses, 4 systems are going to try and get it so we can start making rural systems. The problem that I think we're going to be faced with is we're afraid that that's also going to affect the funds that we need for our regular buses just to replace the 51% that's behind that we're behind the useful life right now in the state. So
Ed,
there's some jobs.
I'd like to piggyback on that. When I was talking to T&I committee Wednesday, I mentioned that one of the changes we'd like to see in Invest, we're happy to see all these funds flowing into bus and bus capital and into NOLO. Probably, we're not sure how much of that ends up getting earmarked. We're in a kind of a gray area on that, but I really want to, and if you can emphasize all particularly the rural and small urbans in Iowa, we need to set aside in NOLO and in some of these things to make sure that rural systems are competing with other rural systems and small urban systems are competing with other small urban systems to get these funds, and not have it so, you're competing with New York and Chicago, who have entirely different capacity to compete than you do. I kind of press the Democrats on the T&I committee to say, if you want to see battery electric bus going into rural communities, and they said, we do, said, then set aside some of these funds so they have to go to rural, and that's where rural should compete. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then before you guys get into your congressional discussions, if any of you are taking people to the vaccine, make sure they hear that. It's the one thing that has the best optics on what transit's doing right now. So please be sure to raise what you're doing in your communities with your members of Congress. And with that, you've heard plenty from me. So thanks.
Well, and if I can just echo one, I think the vaccine point is critical, but one other thing that Scott said earlier, I just want to make sure I reemphasize, which is there's a unique opportunity here. But there is also a window for this to happen, which is it has to happen this year. I would press your delegation like you've never done before to do everything they can to make this happen. Really press them and show them the vision about what would you do if you did get significantly more funding. What difference would that make? I think, Ed, your example of converting rural bus systems to zero emission, that's a great example. I think let them get excited about the vision you have for your communities.
Terry, did you have a question? I think you're unmuted and muted.
Well, I just put it in the chat box, but it could be for Scott or Ward or anybody. Is there a consistent message that you have that you're using for people who ask the question about, well, why money hasn't been spent as quickly as they thought it would be? I think it's important that we're saying the same thing and not just saying, well, no one gave us enough money, and we want to make sure it's all on the same framework.
Terry, my message on that, and I think is 1, local share concerns, 2, out years and impact on local share, and out years and impact on the local economy in Iowa and in smaller communities. 2008 through 2010 taught us that rural economies respond slower and are not as quick to bounce back. So there's that issue. I think how many of the systems across the state did already reduce service. So, you know, these funds aren't just flowing to keep buses driving around empty. That because systems have reduced service, there's additional funds available that as they ramp up, they're going to use. And then, you know, another issue to hit them with is how much of your ridership never went away because the trips you're providing across the state are essential. And so, you know, there hasn't been as massive a loss in fare box and other things because we found small urban and rural tend to be at about 50% ridership loss. And that's a bigger number than a lot of the big urbans or people, you know. A good way to say it to them is you can't telework a dialysis trip.
I also wondered if it hasn't really impacted some of the local budgets yet. I mean, that's a big thing, you know, at a certain point it will, and then they're going to say, well, where do we cut? And that could be the problem. Yeah,
it's funny, states and localities can't deficit spend like the federal government can they? They can't just spend $1 trillion when they don't have it. That reality will sooner or later be the reality for rural transit systems, certainly, small urbans potentially as well. That's going to be an issue that these funds will be there to help with.
And I think, just to echo that, Terry, I think that is a key point, is telling the story of why would you be holding the funds? Well, if you're not a fare box driven system, I mean, if you're a fare box, New York, you saw these effects immediately because you get half of your money from your fare box. If you're a property tax or other local tax, it might be a year or two before you actually see the shortfall hit your budget. I think explaining that to them so they better understand it is really important.
Thank you.
This is Kristen. One other thing we heard initially about the 100% CARES Act money was that some agencies were concerned that if they didn't spend local money as local match, that money would just plain go away. Because the locals would see, oh, well, transit doesn't need our money. And so they take it out of their budgets, and long term, it won't pop back into their budgets because it'll be recommitted to other things. So that's been a concern. I don't know how much, you know, a year later now that's actually come to fruition, but we did hear that initially with the CARES Act money.
Kristen, I hear that from rurals all over the country, and many of them are now in that place of how do I communicate effectively that I'm not going to have these funds forever, and the local share, the local funding, in some cases the state funds that that have disappeared. We're trying to work with strategies to communicate the value of getting them back if you can avoid ever losing them. But then this is a nuanced discussion that's a little tougher when anybody wants to hear, hey, spend it right away. Why aren't you spending this? So that's, I'm glad we're having this discussion.
And Scott, the cities and the counties that we've been working with, they have the same fears as, you know, giving, like allocating that money, and what if they need it for something more urgent when they also know that we have money. So they're trying to balance the same things that we're trying to balance in the rural areas. And it's a delicate balance there.
The key thing is that they understand that you all are being really good stewards of valuable public funding, and that there's a lot of thought going into this, and thought in the out years, and thought in working with localities and states, and that all that gets into play here. And it's not simply we're sitting on the money because we can.
Carl, I think our congressional delegations.
They are, and welcome everyone.
Well, they're much more important than us, so I will drop off. Thank you all.
Actually, that's not true. Hi, everyone. This is Sherry with Senator Grassley's office. I think all of you are going to play a key role, especially this year and the way it may play out in Congress.
Well, Ward, Scott, thank you so much. We would like to welcome our congressional members and delegation here. We will go ahead and get started. And everyone, just a reminder, we will put everyone on mute. Please unmute yourself if you have a question. We will go ahead and get involved with our presentation and would like to welcome everyone. I believe we have Sherry, who just spoke here with Senator Grassley's office, Michael from Joni Ernst, Sam Ward from Representative Axney's office, Carly with Representative Hinson's office, Jeff from Representative Feenstra's, and Caroline from Representative Miller Meek's office. Welcome. Thank you guys for being here. We truly appreciate it. We're a little disappointed. Usually every year we come out and join you guys down at the Capitol, treat you to lunch, and kind of do this in person, but we thought we could do the next best thing. We were able to meet with many of the representatives here back in December just to kind of give a little talk and overview of public transit and how that works on the federal level. But we really are appreciative of your time and will be respectful of that as we kind of go through that. We're just going to talk a little highlight of some of our priorities, a little bit of transit in Iowa, just so it's familiar. And then I would like to call on a couple of our members just to talk about how COVID has impacted our transit system, some of the great things, projects, partnerships that we have worked on. But if you think about public transit in Iowa, the 24 to 26 million rides that we do a year, if you equate that to the stakeholders that are involved, the individuals that are counting on these transit trips, the individuals' connections that we make, we find that's about 137 million connections in a 5-year time period that gets made. What does that translate to then? Well, it translates huge in the whole state of Iowa, which is very unique, that we have public transit in all 99 counties. Very rare that we see states that have that. We just go to our contiguous states, right over Nebraska, more transit systems than we have, still only covers about 2/3 of the state. Missouri, large gaps area. Here in Iowa, our 35 urban and rural systems working together to cover public transit. We think it's a great model. We wish others would adopt that, but we're very proud of that system. The other thing is we also see other states where we have rural systems and urban systems almost have, you know, two different associations, don't work well. And while they have completely different, maybe legislative goals, operating goals, we really strive to work well with Iowa DOT, Iowa Public Transit to represent both the urban and rural systems. When we talk about those connections, talk about the value. When you look at economic development forefront, you're seeing a lot of businesses that are coming into the state of Iowa or being recruited. And one of the top things, besides maybe tax rates, how's the tax climate here in Iowa, employment regulation, is what does the public transit system kind of look like for my employees? Employers, companies are realizing that not everyone has reliable transportation. Public transit is an economic development issue at hand. And we have done a study that is now a few years old, but shows that public transit provides about 100 million back into the state as an economic benefit. We know that 116 households depend on public transit as essential functions. And as you know, we have had, you know, a little over, it's now 24, 26 million rides, but for what? It's keeping individuals independent. It's helping those individuals get to their essential appointments, medical appointments. It's individuals with disabilities, senior citizens, making sure they continue to be independent. And more importantly, individuals are really relying on, I would say, as you'll find out from some of our constituents here, that we are providing those essential trips, those essential worker trips for a lot of businesses, health communities, health centers. But I would like to talk about how that impact of COVID has impacted our organization. And as you kind of heard during the kind of last year in 2020, and the onset of COVID, a lot of our systems were still operating, but operating at a 50 to 75% level. Having to do, again, pivoting extraordinarily quickly to manage the cleaning, the PP, also increased expenses. But with that, we also saw that drop in ridership to now more than 19 million rides, a 20% decrease in there with some of our updated numbers. So that has been impactful. But as I'm going to have Julia, our president of our association, kind of talk about how that's impacted her system, what they have been doing during the pandemic, you'll see that really we have not had to cut services. We have still been there through the whole time, through the whole pandemic, providing essential services. Julia, would you mind kind of talking about what your system, how it's been impacted by COVID, what you guys have been doing within your community to help?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome. During the pandemic, we, as many of the Iowa transit systems, they did not stop the services that they were doing. They continued the same services. We did the same. We didn't change any of the services that we provided, even though ridership may have been lower. That was because we do take people to work and they were still having to get there, especially for those that go to any healthcare type facilities. We did a lot of dialysis trips, like Scott said earlier. You know, those are things that you can't not do. It doesn't stop just because of a pandemic. And those that did decide that they didn't want to ride, like to the grocery stores and things like that, we started to work with some other agencies so that we could still get them food that they needed to make sure that they were taken care of that way. And, you know, we also had to purchase a lot of PPE, which is something that was difficult in the beginning, became more easier, but I think that's going to be the new norm for most transit systems. We realized that we could keep people very safe. Safety was a huge concern for us in the beginning. And so we did things on our buses to keep our drivers safe and also our passengers. And we were one of the fortunate agencies in doing all of that and spending the funds toward safety, where we did not have any driver contract COVID while they were on the job, or any staff members. So, you know, we really appreciated being able to do that. But so yeah, Carl, was there something else you wanted me to talk about?
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. And with that, as you just kind of heard, we would just like to extend a gracious thank you for the funding that has come in to the state of Iowa, the great relationship that we have with FTA Region 7, which is our counterpart to FTA, Iowa DOT, for the coordinated work that has been done and the strong relationships. Because of that money, we were able to continue essential services, where with talking with some of our systems, they would have had to shut down. Think about the medical trips, essential services that are needed. It really has helped us to know that, you know, other partners, other stakeholders, communities have also been impacted, have not been able to meet those matching funds. This money has helped us to do that, and has allowed us, as the costs have increased for cleaning, for the personal protection equipment, that we are able to continue operations. And more importantly, we are assisting and have partnerships going on with the COVID vaccinations. We have been partnering with the AAAs, the area agencies on aging, with other individuals have been partnering with their county public health to basically transport those individuals. So we are trying to stay on task of being on time for the amount of individuals getting vaccinated, especially for those vulnerable populations as well. So a great thank you to everyone here that has joined us for that.
And Carl, I just wanted to reiterate that not only are we doing the vaccines, but during COVID, we also were taking a lot of people to testing sites as well to get, or not testing sites, but to get them tested as well. So, you know, we did what we could during the pandemic to, for the safety of everyone.
Absolutely. You know, and I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with our 380 Express going from Cedar Rapids, Iowa City. You know, what was so unique about that is we saw a decline in service, but it was still very much very well used. And where was it used? We forget about the essential workers, the nurses, support staff, everyone else truly utilizing that service as their main function of transportation to get to the University of Iowa hospitals. I mean, that was critical infrastructure that we're able to keep going on. I mean, I think that was a great success showing that. I would also like to talk about how public transit is a great, I would say, economic development tool, especially with the public and private partnerships that have been developed. I'm going to introduce you to Mark, who is with SWITA, and talk about some of the programs and program they have developed in building a public-private partnership with a large employer like Menards. Mark, are you on?
Yeah.
And there you are. See you now. Would you like to go ahead and talk about your project that you guys have going on with your transit system?
Well, in 2012, we started working with Menards to provide workforce transportation. And initially, we started out with just one route, you know, it's going from Council Bluffs to Shelby. And then, you know, as that's developed, we've added more employers, we've added more routes. We're currently working with 7 different businesses, providing 8 different work routes. You know, in the COVID year, we hit just under 60,000 rides. We were projecting pre-COVID to hit right around 70,000, and this year we're on track to hit that 70,000. You know, it's been a great help for employers. We're currently working with 2 additional employers to add 2 more routes. And you know, the biggest thing I always hear from our HR people that we work with these businesses is, you know, we're saving them a lot of work hours that, you know, folks, they'll take jobs, you know, these are good paying jobs between $13 and $18 an hour for the folks we service. But a lot of people, their transportation's, it's not up to snuff. You know, you have a 2005 Honda Accord with 200,000 miles on it, and you're expecting it to go 40 miles each way. You know, that's just not realistic a lot of times. So folks that wouldn't really have the chance to get to some of these jobs now have that chance because we're providing the transportation. And it's not just, we're not just taking folks from Omaha and Council Bluffs out to rural areas. We've added routes where, you know, we've added an Atlantic to Shelby route. We've added an Atlantic to Oakland route. We have a Red Oak to Harlan, Iowa route. So it's rural to rural, and it's you know, it's city to rural. So it's been a big deal for this area to have this type of transportation. And you know, we continue to see, like I said, we're working with 2 additional employers. The needs there right now, our biggest issue is finding drivers to drive the routes, because this is a 24/7 operation. We are taking folks all hours of the day and night to work 7 days a week. So you know, there's a lot of growth. We would expect to see 100,000 rides, you know, in the next 5 years. So I mean, that's a pretty big deal when you're talking about a rural transit agency in Southwest Iowa.
Mark, thank you for that update. Appreciate it. I would also like to talk about some of the innovative advancements that have been going on here in the state. And with that, I would like to introduce Aaron Hockman with Des Moines DART and talk about our first electric buses that we have been able to bring into the state of Iowa.
Thank you, Carl, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. DART was thrilled to introduce the state's first electric buses at the end of this last year. This really would not have been possible without the support from our federal delegation and the local match that Mid-American Energy provided. which helped us secure a nearly $1.5 million lower no emission grant. Without this funding, it really wouldn't have been possible for us to purchase the 7 electric buses that we now have in service. So I want to extend a big thank you to Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst, Congresswoman Axne, and Mid-American Energy for their support of this project. We are considering it a pilot project. And this is a new technology for us. And so we are really working to learn and monitor and measure how these buses perform here in central Iowa so we can understand the long-term impact and how this might change the makeup of our fleet into the future. So far, they are meeting our expectations, in some cases even exceeding our expectations. Some of the metrics that we're really looking at is the overall range that we can get from a single charge. Are they meeting our expectations of getting between 150 and 230 miles per charge? What is the overall payback period that we can anticipate? Proterra, the bus manufacturer that we purchased these buses from, estimates that we should see a $400,000 savings over the life of the vehicle. And that's something that our board of commissioners is a key factor for them in establishing this pilot project, is hoping to see that we can really find some efficiencies in our operating costs over the life of the vehicle, even though there is, as you all know, an upfront cost, a higher upfront cost in purchasing these vehicles. And some of that comes from, reduced maintenance because the vehicles have fewer parts, and just the other metric that we're looking at is overall vehicle reliability, to ensure that we can continue to provide the same good service that we do with these buses as with our diesel buses. So really excited, continuing to monitor performance, and we'll be happy to keep you all updated on how they're performing. We know there are several other agencies now in the state of Iowa that are preparing to bring more electric buses into service, and so we're happy to be able to partner and support those efforts across the state as well. And again, just want to say thank you to our federal delegation for their support of our lower no emission grant application that made this possible.
Excellent, Erin. Thank you so much for that. I would also like to introduce Terry with NTS and talk about unique kind of partnership that they really work on with the community, with the county, and their work in making sure individuals are meeting workforce trips, other things, along with public transit. Terry, go ahead.
Well, I'll talk a little bit, but if Kay Fisk is still on the line, she's the person with NTS who might have specific background about what they're doing right now. But I've worked with NTS for a number of years, and so I'm aware of their service. My position is I'm the mobility manager here in Lynn County, so I work with all the transportation agencies and government entities and nonprofits to make sure that people are informed of and have access to coordinated transportation services that can improve their quality of life and help meet their needs. Along those lines, a number of years ago, neighborhood transportation services was started because there is a gap in a city like Cedar Rapids when the transit buses stop running at about 7 o'clock at night, and people are trying to get to second and third shift jobs and jobs on the weekend when our bus service isn't running. And so NTS has done an incredible job of finding where the need was and putting out a service that will be able to meet those needs. That has meant thousands and thousands of rides over the course of the years they've been in service, and particularly this year when there was a time when Cedar Rapids Transit had to stop running for COVID concerns. NTS continued to run to get very important essential workers to their jobs. NTS has always been the sort of nonprofit transit agency that is there and understands whatever is needed in the community is what they want to be able to provide. They're trying to do some new things, including now working with a transit agency or transit partner VIA to provide rides utilizing an app-based service. So it's much more on demand, more along the lines of an Uber or a Lyft. NTS has again, filled in needs and found creative solutions to all these things. I work with NTS and partners like Lynn County Lifts, and whenever community members contact us and try to find help for their clients or their employees, we get together and try to come up with solutions for those needs. It is really a collaborative process, and NTS has been a great partner in that.
Terry, I appreciate that. Thank you. As we move forward and we talk about different partnerships, you know, we could probably spend another half hour kind of going through each systems and what they have done. You know, DART has put into a place I believe a pilot program which still exists, but dealing with transporting veterans, and they were kind of intrigued how that worked. It exploded. It's something they still continue to do, and it was a valuable service. We see where individuals have partnered with community members, try to find, you know, where's that need. We sometimes heard that there was need to transport children for a summer activity where maybe there was no transportation available, developing those partnerships and moving forward. So we're very excited to share just kind of highlight of some of these with you guys. And again, if we had more time, we would share probably something from each of our different systems. And just to let you know, I mean, usually we're able to bring up, you know, 15 to maybe 20 individuals to our in-person Washington, D.C. fly-in. You know, we have over 30 individuals joining us here, almost from every single one of our 35 different systems. So we're very excited with that. But there are challenges that affect public transit. And we like to talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to turn over to Ed, talk about some of the priorities, solutions we hope that exist to help meet some of those challenges. But of course, the number one, as you probably always know, is funding. Why? Because everyone thinks it's free. And we see the age of our fleet being one of the oldest in the nation. In fact, it was interesting when we were out talking with some of our state representatives over the summer. You know, we were up in Sioux City, and they had bought some buses that were from California that were old to them, but good enough for us because that's how old our fleet is getting. And so even having tried to recycle some of that versus getting new buses, that's where we are, one of the oldest fleets in the nation. Just the cost, when you think of what the gap is and what the need is, it's about 138 million to replace those buses and to get us back to a good state of repair. Unfortunately, how does that come about? You know, what's some of the rationale, the reasons for some of the oldest? Well, when you look at the federal gas tax that is collected in the state of Iowa, only about 66% comes back into the state with that. We also have just a population that is trending older, and rural population that is needing public transit. So that puts added more pressure onto, you know, our buses systems. Finding drivers again is a big challenge for us. And of course, especially after this year, you guys know of our strong winter conditions and what those are like. We truly understand that, which just makes it harder on our buses, creates those rust spots, you know, the salt and grime and everything building up. And of course, it just decreases the life of the bus, unfortunately, which causes those issues. But the funding of that is our capital needs. Another capital need is even thinking about our agencies themselves. 88% of our agencies surveyed show that they are needing additional vehicle storage space, and even dry cold storage considerably helps in our ability to essentially, you know, protect those buses and keep them running a little bit easier, a little bit longer on there. 2/3 of our systems are at max space. They are crowding in. I visit some of our systems where everyone just kind of crowd in to their administrative office. And now with kind of returning individuals to work, we're having to rethink that, only because we have to create better social distancing opportunities for individuals. But I would like to introduce Ed, our federal legislative liaison here, to talk about a few of the priorities that we'll be talking about, how some of the funding sources work, and what we're essentially needing here in Iowa to keep public transit going strong. Ed? Thank you.
Again, thank you, everybody, for joining us from the Hill. I know it's a very busy time, and we appreciate the time that you're giving us. We've supported the Invest Act from last year, which for bus and bus transit systems means an additional 150% increase in bus funding from the federal government. We've spent a lot of time. Iowa developed and started the Bus Coalition, and that now is the 350 systems from across the country. And through that, we've been able to help develop and get an understanding in Congress the need for bus funding for bus transit system. And so through that, we've helped restore the grant program, which both the House and Senate indicated they were not going to do in FAST Act. And then we also, after that, we then helped work on other funding programs. During this next year, there's a lot of needs. Could we have the next slide, please? Through the Invest Act, these were the kinds of increases that was recognized by the T&I committee. You'll see the plus up funding that's there. You see the A formula going from 464 million a year up to 1.3 at the end of the bill. We understand that HR 2210 is going to be the basis for what's going to be considered in the reauthorization process this year. We get mixed messages on how large it's going to be. We understand it may be much larger. We hope it's a bipartisan bill as we go along through it. But there's a lot of money that hopefully will be there for bus transit systems as we move through the next 5 years. These next 5 years are not going to be easy for bus transit systems in Iowa. Local funding is just not there for our systems, whether it's Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, or the rural areas. The communities just don't have the money to put in to buy and purchase the older buses. Could we go to the next slide, please? What we're supporting in the appropriations program request is the plus up of 151 million this next year. The plus ups have been very helpful to bus transit systems. Under the old program, we were cut considerably in the earlier authorization bills. We've been able to help bring that back, but the plus ups by the Appropriations Committee has helped us this last year with a $408 million increase. Iowa's needs over the next year, specific appropriation needs, what we're going to ask all of you for, because we understand that there's going to be the earmarking program. And so through that program, it's been indicated to us that we need to go big and bold. So we're doing that, and we're going to ask for a statewide appropriation of $30 million for the bus and bus facility programs for Iowa. So you'll be seeing, once your offices have figured out and gotten your forms together, if you're going to do appropriation requests, we're going to ask you to put in 30 million for bus this next year. And on the authorizing bill, we're requesting 150 million. That would be for replacing the $138 million we talked about earlier for buses, but also for facilities. So a total of about $150 million in the authorizing bill. We also, in the rural systems, we're going to be asking for your help to get a zero emissions grant for 16 buses in 4 rural systems. We understand the push by the administration, the new administration, for electrifying buses. And if you listen to what what the different manufacturers like Ford and GM that produce the front ends and the drivetrains for their cars in the future, or the vans that we use, or the cutaway buses that we use, that's all going to be electric in about 15 years. We have to plan for that, and we need to test some of these. So we're asking for a NOLO zero emission grant to help start looking at those processes. So we're looking to the future, and some of those are the opportunities that we have there. Next slide, please. We support the infrastructure package with the replacement of 15,000 large urban buses and 14,700 small buses programs, which would help with the paratransit and our rural bus systems. Those are large numbers, but hopefully through the legislative process, some of that will be handled. What I'd like to do is open it up, if we could, to the congressional staff people to hear what they're doing with regard to the earmarking process, so our members have an understanding of what that is. Sherry, do you want to kick that off on the Senate side?
Yeah, hi everyone, good to join you. For the Senate side, Senate Republican Conference currently has a rule including an earmark ban, and that has not changed yet. So I'm not sure if there's when or how that discussion may or may not take place, but as of right now, nothing has changed on the Senate side, at least, Senate Republican side, on any type of earmarks. I'm sure the House can fill you in, and every office might have something slightly different going on, but we'll let you know how that might change from a Senate perspective in the future. However, it would be much, much different from what anything looked like in the past. So I just warn you about that in on the onset. For any of your grant applications, and I know some of you have already sent in some of those to our office, and I'm sure you sent those to other offices as well. If any of you apply for a federal grant, please make sure that you're contacting and reaching out to us so we can provide letters regarding those applications. And every office has a slightly different process there too, but please be reaching out to your congressional delegation on that. And then just for any type of reauthorization and or being part of a grander infrastructure bill, any of those types of things. Certainly, well, I'll just speak specifically for Senator Grassley and then kind of larger process. Senator Grassley certainly has worked very hard over the years on infrastructure and many authorizations and helping pay for all of this, that kind of thing. And certainly the senator would like to see this move forward in a bipartisan manner. Infrastructure has always been one of the areas that we've always moved bipartisanly through both chambers. And so Senator Grassley would like to see that happen and continue there. And he has reached out to all the authorizing committees and have already started talking about how to protect Iowa priorities. I think for you all, your biggest challenge is keeping the focus on buses, and for all states and all communities of buses. We don't want to have any type of a repeat where anyone might want to take the significant amount of money that might be coming towards transit and only having those go to the 10 or to the largest systems or for fixed rail systems or any of those. So I think that is our laser focused challenge. The Bus Coalition has been very helpful. Very glad that that has been, but that has to be the laser focus, just constant. Even over the amount of funding per se, I think it has to be that every state has buses that meet the needs of all of the people who use transit. Not everyone just uses that. That has to be the laser focus for the whole delegation. And that is my answer to, obviously, part of that is the money to replace the buses and keep our facilities and protections, especially in states that we have a lot of inclement weather and, you know, the rust belt of snow and salts and treatments and rain and all of that. But we do a wonderful job of serving the whole state. And that's the story I always start with, is that Iowa has always been focused on providing some way to meet the needs of all Iowans, especially in a largely rural state that has a lot of folks that are still in their home, and it's about quality of life. And certainly during the pandemic, you've all been trying your best to meet the needs of all of your constituents as well as ours in meeting their transportation needs. And there's been real challenges, but laser focus. That's all I have to say. And I know that's always our laser focus, but I reiterate that, especially now, should this go in a bipartisan manner, I think there's a lot of voices that can help with that. If it goes in a more partisan manner, I just don't want statewide bus systems, and even smaller, say DARTs and the rides and the different ones that have different types of needs that fall out of there or are kind of in the middle of the road, to get lost in the shuffle or have any type of focus on just the largest systems that, you know, have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. You know, I'm thinking of the New York subway systems of the world that's already received quite a bit of money for that, just because no one's going down in the high rises of, you know, downtown Manhattan from all points. And we have continued to serve our Iowans throughout this pandemic, try to be, you know, good stewards of the money and resources we have, but also finding ways to meet the needs that we have in our community. So that's shout out for both the Iowa folks, our associations, but also for the delegation. Laser focus on bus programs and all of that, to no matter how this plays out here in DC.
Sherry, we also want to thank the senator for his work on the NEMT through the Finance Committee. His leadership helped codify the NEMT program that had taken 25 years to get that work done, and only because of his work was that able to happen in legislation. And so on behalf of the IPTA, we want to really thank him for his work in that area.
We were very happy we could move on that.
Yeah. Michael, how about Senator Ernst and what you're doing in the area of the earmarks and how that works, because I know you're probably in somewhat the same position with regard to Sherry and what's happening on the Senate side. Michael, do you have any comments, Far?
Mary Kate might be on the line. Mary Kate?
And it looks like Michael's online. We're just trying to connect here, so we might
Okay.
just give him another
I was
minute.
gonna say, I know that they're on because we had a conversation
And this is
on it.
Mike. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry, I had an issue there. Ed, as you know, you and I have had discussions about this offline. The earmark issue is pretty challenging for Senator Ernst. She's pretty staunchly opposed to them. We're happy to be as helpful as we can on the authorization side, but it's really something that it's been her policy for the last 6.5 years or so to not do appropriations requests, and earmarks would fall into that category as well. So happy to continue the discussion, and if the playing field does change over the next couple months and earmarks are brought back, I'm sure she's open to continue talking with folks, but just overall pretty challenging issue for her.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew how you were going to be handling that. We understand those kinds of issues when it happens. It's just the process, and we appreciate your help on the programming side of getting the funding up as high level as we can in the transportation program area. I'd like to turn now, if we could, to let's see, the first district, that would be Caroline. Caroline is new to, I think, Congressman Miller Meek's office, and she's going to be handling the transportation issues now. Caroline, have you been there long enough to figure out how you guys are going to handle requests for earmarks at this point?
Hi, Ed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So our office, I'm Caroline Bender, Legislative Assistant for Congresswoman Miller Meeks. Nice to meet you all, and thank you for the presentation. We are still figuring out how we're going to handle the earmarks coming back. So I don't have great guidance for you all or information, but what I can do is, encourage you to reach out with requests, and as we work through our process, we will keep in communication with you all and let you know what we decide to go forward with.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And then Carly, are you online? That would be from Congresswoman Hinson's office. Okay, then let's go to the next one. Let's say that would be the second. I'll take these a little out of order. Sam Ward with the Congresswoman Axne's office. What's going to be your policy?
Yeah, hey Ed. First off, thanks everybody for inviting us and having this presentation. It's always good to connect with you all. For the earmark process, it has come back on the House side under a new approach with the community project funding for appropriations, which I flagging that as, so if you've been working on earmarks when they were last around 10 years ago, the process has shifted a lot. There's a lot more restrictions and a lot more disclosures around it. I don't think that should worry anything that you all will be pushing for. Most of everything that I imagine will be eligible and will meet all the community support requirements and et cetera. But we do have a process set up for the community projects funding with appropriations. We just received guidance, I believe 2 days ago, from the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee about the member directed projects through the infrastructure package. We're still kind of working through that, and we'll have more information on that soon. But we want to work with you all on identifying projects that would be helpful, that fills those needs, that serve the community, and that deserve the investment on the House side, with the recognition that the Senate is still up in the air about where all this will really go. But we want to make sure that while we have the opportunity, we're putting forth the best projects. So thank you to those who already have reached out, and Lisa this morning, I appreciate that email. And I'll encourage the rest of you to reach out, and so we can work with you to identify what is eligible, and work with Ed to make sure that we're putting up good projects that will have a chance to receive funding. Otherwise, on the other aspects that we touched on in this presentation, we're certainly supportive, and we're glad to pass the surface reauthorization last year. Obviously, that was extended to the end of September, and looking forward to working on that as well, and keeping the transit levels up, and all the good things that you mentioned, Ed, that were included in that. We expect the president to unveil a plan or ideas, broad strokes, on the infrastructure package as a whole next week. And then the committee will be working on it, and hopefully have text in May. First off, I want to echo a lot of what Sherry said. We want to see it bipartisan as well. That's a space, infrastructure is a space where we've had great bipartisan support on, where we want to continue that, and hope that we can get folks at the table in making sure that happens. But we're encouraged about what we saw last year in the House package, and particularly where it comes to transit, and want to make sure that, and we imagine that will be the framework for what's going to come out of the committee this year. So we want to make sure that we support all those provisions in there that are important to you all. And then on the appropriations, the normal appropriations front, we're certainly supportive of the bus and bus facilities program, and we'll be happy to support that plus up as well. I think that's all I got, but I really want to just encourage you all to reach out to us. My email's in the chat. Ed knows how to get a hold of me. We want to make sure that we work with you all on these community project funding, and then through the T&I once we know more. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Jeff, we've already sent out, met with your boss, but we've sent out to the people on the call the form that your office provided us. But kind of tell us where you are.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, it cut out a little bit there. Did you say just where we are with earmarks currently? Okay, great. Yeah, so obviously with the House Republicans approving it, wow, it's already been, a week ago now. So obviously we're still, meeting and learning how it goes. So we've already, received requests. Again, feel free to reach out to our office on those. Obviously, we're the requirements are quite stringent. So a lot of these are going to be on the community project requests, case by case as far as the subcommittee, and then as we figure out, which accounts are most eligible. But just kind of echoing, what the past few folks have said. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're working with folks already, getting what requirements they need, and letting them know what it's looking like this go round. But yeah, it's definitely top of mind. And I know the the database, I believe, opens up in the next month or so, and the deadline was extended a bit on it as well because of these new potential requests coming in. So just don't hesitate to reach out to me and Congressman Feinster's office, and we'll work with you and see what ideas we have and what we can move forward on.
We appreciate that, and we appreciate all of the congressional delegations, offices, and because one thing nice about Iowa, I remember back when I was on Senator Grassley's staff, we all worked together as a team for Iowa. All of the offices didn't make any difference what party you were with, to get as much funding as we could back to the state of Iowa. And we all at the Iowa Public Transit Association appreciate the work that you guys do to help make that happen, because it's not easy, and we want to make it as easy as possible. And so just also let us know if you ever have any questions about your systems. But we also want to invite your bosses and you, whenever you're out in the state, to come to our systems. Just contact our system. Say, hey, I'm going to be in your area. I'd like to stop by and find out how your system's going, what you're doing, and what your needs are, because that we want to be able to provide to you whenever you're out in the area. Carl, do you have anything else?
Not at this moment. Again, we just like to extend a great thanks for everything that you guys are doing, being able to be here with us today, and hopefully by next year we'll be back in person, and you know, kind of join you guys for lunch here. But if there are any questions, you know, feel free. Again, my name is Carly, and I serve as Executive Director for Iowa Public Transit Association. We love to be a resource for you guys, and Ed as well. Just know that when we deal with a lot of different issues, workforce issues, individuals trying to have barriers to get their GRE or higher education, we look at the #1 issues with our county public health departments on what barriers there are. Transit always is usually in the top #1 or #3 spot here. And if you're hearing constituents issues or some challenges, please reach out to us. We have a great wealth of individuals to find solutions for those. But otherwise, thank you for joining us today. And with that, everyone, unless anyone else, members, have any questions specifically they'd like to ask any of our constituent congressional members, we can certainly let us know either through chat box, raise your hand, or unmute yourself, have them on. But otherwise, we will probably break here for a little bit and be back with our next speaker, talk about the Bus Coalition right at, I believe, 11 o'clock.
Thank you all. And just a reminder, please have everyone laser focus on buses for all. So that is the laser focus in any of the efforts on the congressional side, and we'll continue to do that too.
Sherry, thanks so much.
Do you want to take a 10-minute break? Because I know Joel is on here. So we could start anytime you want to do it.
I'll see y'all later.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, let's go ahead and I say let's take 10 minutes. Let's meet back here at 20 till or so. Maybe we'll get done. We'll get started a little earlier, and then we'll get done a little earlier and give everyone back some time. I know everyone's busy, but we'll be back and seeing everyone in about 10 minutes. They have been working nonstop along with Ed, really advocating for our change. And think about the role and responsibility. I mean, you got COVID going on. On top of that, you have a bunch of new legislators, new congressional members in office, have no idea about public transit and the needs out there, that they're having to now go back and start almost all over again with that. So we're very excited to have Joel join us and talk about the Bus Coalition. I will do just a little introduction, as Joel spent the last 5 years staff of Washington Congressman Brian Baird. We worked on a wide range of Northwest issues. He rose up through the ranks, Baird's office, and only served as legislative director before leaving the Capitol Hill. And Joel works as a lobbyist in DC, where he represents public and private sector clients, many of which are based on the West Coast. Joel's areas of issue expertise include appropriations and transportation, energy budget, taxes, trade, defense, labor, banking, and small business. We'd just like to welcome you, Joel. Thanks for joining us. Again, we wish we were in person. It's always been enlightening, but I feel like we never get enough Bus Coalition updates. And so we always appreciate when you guys send those out and the work that you have been doing. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Carl. Thank you Iowans for allowing me a few minutes of your time. I know everyone's busy, but the Bus Coalition is doing a lot of important things, and this is a great opportunity for me to bring you all up to speed on some of the things that we're doing. Ed Redfern is the leader of the Bus Coalition. He's one of the original creators of the Bus Coalition. And what this organization has been doing since its founding is quite astonishing on Capitol Hill. The amount of funds that have been restored to the Bus and Bus Facility Program, the amount of recognition of need for bus transit around the country has, from 2012 and what happened in MAP 21 when there were serious cuts, to today, where Bus and Bus Facilities is recognized as one of the most important transit funding components, is in no small measure Ed's responsibility. So thank you, Iowans, for giving us Ed Redfern and creating the Bus Coalition and making sure that you have a louder voice here in Washington, D.C., because that's what it's all about. You need to have a really strong voice. There's a lot of competing interests back here. And it's not just as simple as saying, yeah, buses, bus transit systems have needs. It's really a long-term strategic effort to make sure you have the right messages, the right data, and the right connections. And Ed's been behind all of that. So thank you for that. I just wanted to say that at the outset. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Looks like this
should be able to.
Should work. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bus Coalition story. Some of you all may have heard about this. I don't know that we had a Bus Coalition members meeting on Monday. So there might be a couple people on the call that have heard the story before, either on the Monday call or we like to tell it often, but as a good marketer, folks need to hear things at least 3 times to fully sink in, or 3 times or more. Talk about the Bus Coalition's federal agenda on reauthorization, the plus-ups infrastructure package. I'll go into a little bit more detail on the earmark process. I know the congressional offices gave you a little bit of a taste of what may be happening moving forward. And then I was going to make a quick plug for the Bipartisan Congressional Bus Caucus. So this is our story. This is in my lapel, or in my suit jacket. I always have a graph of what the Bus Coalition story is. So if you ever see me on Capitol Hill, ask me to pull it out, and I'm sure it'll be there. It's like my little constitution that I keep on me, like members of Congress have.
And Joel, would you mind just enlarging your PowerPoint, not PowerPoint, your PDF, just full size? Perfect.
Is that good?
Thanks. Looks good.
Great. So yeah, this all these squiggly lines here is the Bus Coalition story, believe it or not. By the end of my 2-minute talk here, hopefully it'll all make sense to everybody on the Zoom. The Bus Coalition was formed in 2013 in large measure because of these funding cuts here. But what we're looking at here is the FTA basically has 3 funding programs for transit. In the blue, you have the Bus and Bus Facility Program. In the red, you have the New Starts Program. In the yellow is the State of Good Repair or RAIL program. There's dates down here at the bottom, starting in 2011, going through 2021. And then on the left side, we have the percentage of change in funding increases and decreases. The Bus and Bus Facility Program, which is what we're focused on primarily, was a roughly $1 billion per year bus capital and facility capital grant and earmark program. It was a full 100% earmarks back in the day. Then it became a full 100% grant program all the way through 2012. In 2012, what happened? A lot of things happening with the Bus Coalition. There's a lot of historic things that have happened. So it's been a wild ride. Like I said, the Bus Coalition wasn't formed until 2013, but what happened in 2012 with MAP 21, the Bus and Bus Facility Program was cut by 57%. That doesn't happen back here for major programs. It was really a surprise to a lot of bus transit systems when they turned around and realized what had happened. 57% cut. We went from $1 billion per year to $420 million. But in addition to that, the program was entirely formalized. So $420 million of that, 50% of all of that formula went to the top 20 transit systems. So the rest of the country outside of those top 20 transit systems had about $200 million per year. Most of your systems would receive 100,000, 200,000, maybe as high as $500,000 per year to replace your bus fleets and to deal with your capital needs. The impacts to your systems was devastating, and you still see them today as you put your numbers out there for the congressional delegation. So basically, we went from $1 billion program to not a $420 million program, but because if you take those top 20 systems out, it's really a $200 million program. It's not just a 57% cut. If you look at it that way, it was really like an 80% cut for all of the systems outside of the top 20. Huge, devastating cuts to bus transit. At the same time, you see the New Starts program and you see the rail program are doing quite well. So that's why Ed created the Bus Coalition in 2013, saying this should not have happened and it cannot happen again, and we need to get that money back. So our first prime time effort was the FAST Act reauthorization bill in 2015, where Ed did an amazing job reaching out to more than 100 congressional offices, all the T&I committee, banking committee, to restore a significant amount of money to the bus and bus facility program over time, and restore the competitive grant program that the members of Congress had eliminated. So under the FAST Act, I'd say we probably hit a double or maybe even a triple in terms of restoring a lot of these funds. But by the end of the FAST Act, we're still 16% below where we were in 2012. They were about $808 million per year for bus and bus facility. And back here, we were at $1 billion. But thank goodness for the Bus Coalition and all the work that you all have been doing over these last 4 fiscal years, is that this dotted line here is the plus ups that we've been working on. In FY18, the bus and bus facility program was plussed up $400 million. It was plussed up $390 million in FY19, plussed up $453 million in 20. And just this last fiscal year in December, we were able to get an additional $408 million. When we talk about creating history here, these plus ups, we're getting more than 80% of all of the plus up funding in the transit pot. So the Bus Coalition has been driving additional resources to the bus and bus facility program, working with our allies on the Hill. One other fun historic point is during the FAST Act, never had I seen before an amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives. Part of the reason we got this funding back is because of a bold amendment strategy approach led by Ed Redford, where there was an amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives offered by Congresswoman Herrera Butler to transfer $1.5 billion from one account. This is the high density state account that 7 transit systems get to take advantage of. We call it the high density earmark account. Transfer $1.5 billion from that account and bring it over to the nationwide bus and bus facility account. Never have I ever seen a $1.5 billion amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives pass to transfer money from one program to another by voice vote. It was pretty remarkable and allowed us to bring back, we didn't get the full $1.5 billion back in the final House Senate conference, but we did get about $1 billion back out of that amendment strategy. So Bus Coalition is doing some really cool, unique things that you don't see on Capitol Hill very often. So between that $1.5 billion amendment and all of these plus ups, it's been a pretty good run here these last few years. Well, getting back to the cuts and the impacts of these cuts to your systems and systems across the country, they led to an increase in buses operating past useful life of 41%. They increased buses operating past 15 years was 82%. These cuts are devastating to transit systems across the country. And that's part of our message here to the appropriators, to the authorizing committees, that what happened here is having horrible consequences across the country. Add to that, this is another graph here. This shows the fleet size from 2013 down to 2019, the most recent NTD data. Fleet size has decreased 24%. We went from 74,000 buses on the road to less than 58,000 buses today. That's crazy. 24% decrease in fleet size. We think that is directly related to, back up to this slide, the 57% cut, and then we're still not back to where we were under Safety Lou in 2012. 24% cut in the number of buses that are on the road, revenue buses. 16,787 buses gone. This obviously to us is the primary driver behind ridership decline. If you're going to have 24% fewer buses on the road, of course you're going to have a 16% decline in ridership. You're not losing ridership primarily because of Ubers and Lyfts. You're not losing ridership primarily because gas prices are going down. You're losing ridership primarily because you have nearly 17,000 fewer buses on the road. That's the message that members of Congress need to hear, because it's not anything that you're doing wrong. It's not that buses are the transportation mobility way of the past. It's because they cut your funding and you don't have the buses to operate systems the way you need to. In addition, those older buses cost more to run, so they're a drain on your resources. You've reduced your, you've had less frequent headways going from 5 minutes frequency to 10 or 15, or just elimination of routes because you don't have the resources to serve your system the way it needs to be served. So this is the message that we've been telling, using data and tying the data. We've been using this message on Capitol Hill, and that's resonated in terms of those plus ups in the appropriations process. And it's given us a good head start on the House side for the transportation reauthorization bill. I watched a lot of the slide presentations of Iowa's story, and it's very much in line with the Bus Coalition story that we're telling. It's very much in line with a number of states across the country. So aligning our story with your story is really critical. And I think it was Sharon from Senator Grassley's staff who mentioned, let's focus like a laser on buses. That's exactly what we're doing here with our messaging. Make sure when you're talking to your congressional delegation, like you did today, tell them how many buses are operating past useful life. You'll have over 50%. That number is pretty staggering, operating past useful life. Talk about the smaller fleet sizes, talk about increased headways. If you have fewer routes, higher maintenance costs, all of those things, you are doing a great job of communicating that to your congressional delegation. All the facility needs and the costs associated with that. It's really important to convey those specific costs for your systems and your state to the congressional delegation. And you all are doing a great job at that as well. And if you had received a competitive grant in the last few rounds that as a result of some of these plus ups, please let the congressional members know how important those funds have been to your system, that you were able to replace some really old buses, were able to restore some of your system, and also address some of your facility needs. And I know Iowa's been successful in securing some of even those larger competitive grants as well. In addition, we don't want to talk about the need, we need more money, but what are the benefits? And I think Scott Bogren and Ward from IPTA this morning talked a bit about what benefits that public transportation provide to communities across the country. We're trying to fit a little bit more into the leadership and the new Biden administration, making sure that equity, labor, workforce development, climate, and jobs are front and center when any type of communication that we have on the Hill. We also want to talk, I think as Ward and Scott spoke this morning as well, about how you all survived through the pandemic. These stories are critical for your congressional offices to hear about how you all are a lifeline to your community, to the essential workforce, providing opportunities for folks to get vaccinated, providing food using your transit fleets for Meals on Wheels or what have you. All of those stories are critical for your congressional delegation to understand that buses are important now and they're going to be important again in the future as we get back to an economic recovery. So I'm just going to talk real quick about reauthorization. I know Ed hit some of these points. Talk quick about reauthorization, the plus up, and our infrastructure ask. The simple, we're trying to keep it simple for folks. At the end of the day, one of the biggest things we're trying to do is get back to a 40-40-20 transit capital spending ratio. 40% for the New Starts program, 40% for the State of Good Repair rail program, and 20% for buses. That was the historic agreement going back to the 80s in terms of the funding allocation between the three transit modes. 40% for state of good repair, 40% for new starts, and 20% for buses, despite the fact that buses carry over 51% of all trips. But we're just trying to get that back to that 20%. Right now, we're at about 14% because of those cuts from MAP 21. So let's get back to that 20%. And we also want to make sure that we're maintaining and increasing those competitive grant programs. We don't want to go back to those all formula programs because that benefits primarily those top 20 systems. So what accomplishes those two main things is Chairman DeFazio's, the House T&I Committee's Invest Act, especially we're focused on the bus provisions there. The Invest Act that passed the House of Representatives that was referred to by Ed earlier in his presentation increased transit funding by 50%. That's really good. But increased bus transit funding by 150%. That's really good. That's exactly what we're looking for. We want to grow the pie for everybody, but we need to make up for the historical wrongs that have been made to bus transit systems. So that's why we're proud of the work we did. Ed and I and a number of members of the Bus Coalition had hundreds of meetings, meeting with T&I committee staffers and on the Senate side as well, the banking committee, to make sure that buses weren't just, just receive the normal funding increases. We needed to be increased at a faster clip than all other transit programs because of what's happened. And again, it's not that easy just to ask that and get it. But we were really proud of the mark that we received in the bus and bus facility program. So the key provisions, as Ed mentioned before, 150% increase in bus and bus facility, going from $808 million per year to $2.15 billion per year. Now that's going to start providing some real benefits to transit systems like yours. The formula was increased from 464 million to 1.3 billion, nearly 2.7 times increase. So your formula money that you received on a yearly basis will be increased by about 2.7 times. For these rural systems, the state will be able to allocate a similar amount throughout the state. One of the things that we helped create was a sub-formula to replace some of the oldest buses in the fleets. So we asked the committee to create a sub-formula of $190 million per year. So the top 20 transit systems that have the oldest buses, the oldest fleets, would get $190 million a year to replace those oldest buses. That relates to about 300 to 350 buses per year that are focused really at the oldest buses, something we've heard a lot from our membership about. And then facility needs is something that we've heard a lot about, that facilities are aging and they need to be repaired and replaced. A new facilities pot and bus expansion pot was replaced the old 5339B program, and it was significantly increased in funding at $378 million per year on average. And then finally, a bus replacement program, a zero emission bus replacement program of $356 million per year to help transition to zero emission buses. So we're really proud of what the investments are in the Invest Act. As it was said earlier, we anticipate that the Invest Act is going to serve as a model. And within the next probably month, you're going to see the Transportation Committee publish their new transportation reauthorization bill. I don't think it's going to be too much different from the bill last year. And we're just fighting to make sure that the positive changes that we were able to incorporate are maintained or that they are increasing in the House version. On the Senate side, our message is the same. We want you to get back to 40-40-20, increase the competitive grant programs, and use the Invest Act as a model. We had a great meeting last week with Chairman Brown, who's the new chairman of the Banking Committee, who will be marking up and drafting the legislation. He made it clear that he's heard from the Bus Coalition. He supports what we're doing. So we feel like we have a really good running start on the Senate side too, but we're going to need your help working with all senators, including your Iowa senators, to make sure that these funding increases are seen on both the House and the Senate side. This one's, again, like trying to keep it easy and simple on the appropriations plus up. These are the annual appropriations bills. Like you saw, we had annual plus ups for the bus and bus facility program. We're asking for a $432 million plus up. Why $432 million? That's the number it takes to get back to that 20%, 40-40-20. So we're linking everything back to the same request. If we got a plus up $432 million. That'll take this $808 million funding level from reauthorization, bring it up to $1.2 billion. That gets you to 40-40-20. So it's a consistent message that we're sending. And we're focused on the competitive grant program in terms of the specific ask, not to go to formula, but to go to those larger lumpy purchases so everyone nationwide can compete for those funds. So a pretty simple request there, and appreciate you all reaching out to your congressional delegation and asking for this plus up again this year. I would say this year's a little bit unique. The last 4 fiscal years, we have had an opportunity for plus ups. Another historic thing that the Bus Coalition to be able to do is there have never been plus ups in the transit programs before for the bus and bus facility program. The Bus Coalition has been successful 4 years in a row of getting plus ups, working with you and working with members of Congress. That opportunity might go away because they are working on a reauthorization bill and some budgetary differences that we've had over the last 4 years. So we're still asking for it, or we're just not as optimistic that we would get it this year, but we'll see what happens. You don't get it if you don't ask. And then last, on the infrastructure package, which should be unveiled next week in Pennsylvania by the president. We've been told to go big. We initially met with the Department of Transportation, Ed and I, early on in late January, early February, and outlined our initial infrastructure package plan. And he said, "You're not thinking big enough." It was a kind of a sea change in terms of what we've been doing back here. We're kind of justifying all of our requests with, buses operating past useful life and tying it to NTD data. And they said, you need to think of this differently. We need to think about a 21st century transit network, a 21st century mobility network that connects communities like never before. So we were told to think bigger and go bigger. So we're putting out some minimum parameters for any infrastructure package and not tying dollar amounts to it, because I have a feeling they're going to be in the near $100 billion for the bus program for some plans out there, and maybe even the administration's plan. So we're just putting out the need, which is, again, all tied to NTD data. There are 14,000 buses operating past useful life. Let's replace all of those. There are 14,000 plus smaller buses, cutaways, paratransit buses that are operating past useful life. Let's replace all of those. Let's restore the bus fleet size to at least the 2013 fleet size level. That's another nearly 17,000 buses. And let's repair and replace the 1,800 facilities that have been identified by the FTA for repair and replacement to get it to a state of good repair. Let's do it all at 100% federal cost share. One of the things we've heard from a number of members is, yes, if you're going to be pouring a lot of federal money into this, we just don't have the local match to meet all of that demand. So let's do this all 100% federal cost share, similar to the Obama stimulus back in 2009. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's our infrastructure package ask. We think there's going to be some big numbers that come out soon. We think the Majority Leader Schumer is going to come out with some big numbers on the bus side. And we're very eager to see what the administration is going to be coming up with as well. So we're going to be advocating and working really hard to see an infrastructure package go into place, hopefully in the next 6 months. Our action plan is for you and for us. We are encouraging you all to meet with your congressional delegations, tell your story, tell our story. That's what you're doing here today. Do it through Zooms, do it through tours outside of this conference, do it in-person meetings if people are taking in-person meetings. You please incorporate our asks within your ask. We know that's hard sometimes when you all are going through the list of your specific priorities for your bus replacement grants and earmarks and all the needs that you have. If you can just put in at the end some of these simple talking points or simple messages when it comes to reauthorization, plus ups and infrastructure package, that goes a long way if they're just hearing that at the end of your presentation to the members of Congress. Our goal at the Bus Coalition is to reach out to 100% of all T&I committee and banking committee members and staff over the first 100 days. And we want to grow the bipartisan Congressional Bus Caucus. If your member is not on the Congressional Bus Caucus, please ask them to join. Right now we have about 33, 34 members. We're trying to get it up to 60 members. The Bus Caucus represents that institutional infrastructure on the Hill to make sure that what happened in MAP 21 never happens again, but also to increase bus funding. If there was a bus caucus back in 2012, they would have never had 57% decrease in the bus-to-bus facility program. Nobody was looking at it. Nobody was paying attention, to be honest. And then we will be coordinating with all of you and all of our membership, as these next 4 or 5 months are going to be insane. There's going to be proposals. There's going to be large, huge infrastructure and reauthorization bills put out there. There's going to be tons and dozens of amendments that are put out there that we're going to have to take a position on. And we're going to be looking to work with you all to make sure that your congressional delegation is aware of all of the moving parts associated with moving a reauthorization bill and or an infrastructure package. You talked about earmarks a little bit. Obviously, the congressional delegation, not unlike a lot of the conversations that we're having with members of Congress from across the country, it's just a little bit unclear exactly what the way it's going to play out. It's confusing too, and a lot of people haven't been here in DC back in 2010 and before then when the earmark process was around. So there's a steep learning curve for congressional staff and congressional offices that haven't gone through this before. But earmarks are a lot more fun than the FTA grant process. I hope no one from FTA is on this, but earmarks are a lot simpler. They're a lot more flexible. And you have the member of Congress who understands your district a lot better than these bureaucrats back in DC making the decisions. So there's a lot of benefits to the earmark process in terms of moving legislation through. And giving people a reason to vote yes on appropriations and other bills. There's obviously the downsides of bringing back earmarks in terms of the appearance of pay to play and some of the projects not being spent wisely or on time. So it's incumbent upon all of you all, if you're putting together earmark requests, to make sure that you'll be able to spend it in a timely manner, that it's a good project that has community support, and that you'll be able to deliver on time. If the money's sitting there for years and years, it creates some problems for members of Congress and the overall structure of the earmark process. So appropriations earmarks is one thing, reauthorization earmarks is a separate deal. So appropriations earmarks, and the Bus Coalition is going to be hosting a call on April 6th or 8th. We're working on the timing right now to dive deeper into the earmark process. If you all are interested, we'll be sending around notification within the next couple of days. We have 3 lobbyists that will be leading the conversation to give their expertise and insight into how to best position your projects for success. For the appropriations process, you're going to be looking at projects ranging from about $500,000 to $3 million, kind of smaller projects, smaller facility needs, maybe 3 to 5 bus replacement purchases, just within that funding range. If you ask for something that's $10, $15 million, it's just not going to fit into the parameters of the appropriations process. You're going to want to complete the project or procurement within 1 to 3 years and keep it into that window. They're going to be earmarking the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which is actually a highway program. And the funding flexibility within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program is very flexible. You can get money for design. You can get money, soft cost, design, engineering on the facility side, and also buses, capital, and facility improvements. So this account is much more flexible. Typically, the FTA grant programs don't allow you to do those soft costs or ask for soft costs. It's all construction or capital. This would allow you to do some design. With that said, design is not as sexy as a construction project. So keep that in mind if that's something that you're going to be going after. It might not be as competitive because you can't cut a ribbon. A member of Congress can't cut a ribbon in front of a piece of paper of a design. Community support is going to be critical. Letters of support from your community, having that local match, at least 20%, it's going to be important. Having a finance plan to pay off the entire project cost. For transit projects, it's going to be not that difficult. You all are used to doing these types of requests through the FTA grant program. It's just much simpler. It's 2 or 3 pages with very short project descriptions. And you're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with some of the FTA criteria. So the deadlines in the House of Representatives are all over the place. But what we do know is that on April 28th, The House members need to submit their appropriations projects to the Appropriations Committee. So members of the House are going to be setting deadlines or have already set deadlines that are probably be in mid-April for you all to submit your applications for community projects. So those forms will be sent around. If you haven't seen forms, you might want to reach out to the congressional offices. It sounds like some of them are still working on the process, so just be patient with them. But you all probably have an idea of what you'd be able to apply for. Similarly, because they're not earmarking the bus and bus facility program, there will still be the Low-No program, which is closing in a week or two. There will still be the bus and bus facility program, which will open in probably the next month or so. So you're going to have really multiple pots of money in this year to go after federal funds. You have earmarks through the appropriations process. You have the FTA Low-No emission program. You have the FTA bus and bus facility program. And you may want to go after the same project for all of those because you're not insured that you're going to get funding. But you can talk to your own lobbyists and advisors in terms of strategy about which projects you'd want to put forward. The other opportunity is reauthorization earmarks. They're going to be very similar to appropriations earmarks, but they're going to be much bigger in terms of the allowable costs, anywhere from $1 million to $20 million. We're not sure what account that they would earmark. It could be the bus and bus facility program. I would think it would be. But there isn't a clear process in place in terms of the accounts or the size of requests that you're going to be seeking. But I would just say, get ready, put your list together now of some of your larger facility needs, some of your larger bus procurement requests, as the reauthorization process could be a really good opportunity for you all to really make a dent in some of your older bus fleets. The deadlines, nobody has any deadlines yet. Chairman DeFazio is working on a process, and we should know something by the end of April, though. And you might even need to submit something by the end of April, because it's going to be a quick turnaround. They're probably going to get a process in place and say, all right, call for projects in 2 weeks. We need them really quickly. Unfortunately, that's just how Congress operates, especially when they're bringing back a process like this, and they're still going to need to meet their transportation deadlines of reauthorizing the bill by September 30th. So that's all I had. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. I hope this was helpful information, but did want to thank you all again for the opportunity. We really appreciate the coordination and allowing me to ramble on here for a few minutes. And again, want to thank you all for giving us Ed Redfern and creating the Bus Coalition. I feel like we've done a lot of good work that have helped a lot of communities across the country.
Joe, my system crashed about halfway through, so I didn't hear half of what you said, so I had to go out and come back in again. But what Joel is saying is so important, and why we've spent so much time working with Carl and getting our grant requests ready, or our appropriations requests ready, or our authorization, because it's all a jumble. And this year, with as close as the House and Senate is, as you saw those numbers, we just don't know what to expect the final outcome will be on some of these bills. That's why our overall requests are really high. And we'll take whatever we can get at the bottom line, but we want to make sure that we position IPTA in a place where you'll get the funding that you need. And this is a very unusual opportunity and time to get this kind of thing done. Joel's very modest in what he did to get the Herrera-Butler amendment passed, because that was one of the cities that he worked with as a lobbyist, and he was the one who put what we had as an amendment into place with Herrera-Butler. And we just had all the groundwork behind it. You've seen and heard from him on a lot of things that he and I are working on in the near future to try and get the overall bills and get bus transit at the highest level we possibly can. It's been a very unique opportunity, but he's lined up 25 meetings of the top House staff members that we're working on right now, where he and I will meet with them individually and talk with them over the next few weeks. But that number will quickly shift to 100 House and Senate members. So we've got a lot of work that we're doing in Washington to get you the money you need. And hopefully this is going to pay off. But Joel, you're doing an excellent job and for us in Washington, and we really appreciate that effort.
Thanks,
Ed,
Ed.
I have
Appreciate
oh, I'm sorry. So Ed, what the bus coalition, the stance on match money for rural systems and replacing their buses, are you looking at 100% of funding, or are you still?
We're looking for the next few years to try and get them to drop the matching request.
For buses across, like all buses? Okay.
Or even for facilities.
Okay.
The reason for that is that you're not getting the match.
Right.
You can't get it. And Julia has been very helpful in identifying some of those issues for us as we need them. So we appreciate that, Julia, because it makes it very tough, I know, on the systems right now. And Joel, I think we've heard that all over the country, the same message.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because I'm just like, that's great for the money, but if we can't use it because we can't match it, then it's really not available money for us. So, okay, just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Yeah, two things for Joel too. We serve other clients as well who have national counterparts, and they have just been very interested, envious of how public transit has gotten money. I say, how do they do it? And I said, look, we have a national organization, IPTA, we have CTA, and we have Bus Coalition, all saying the same thing at the federal level. And so the value and the work that Joel's been doing has been instrumental. It's being noticed by other national organizations on how do you kind of do this stuff. But it's because we're not going in and fighting, saying, well, this is kind of our opinion on this. It's like they've kind of gotten together and have reiterated with these congressional members over and over the same message of what that has been. It's been easy for them to identify with that. And so I just want to impress upon you, thank you for sending out the legislative alerts. We try to get that out to our members right away to take action. We know our members do, because they forward us the action notes, just a kind of a blind copy on it. So we appreciate you doing that too. The second thing I just mentioned is when you talk about the congressional members wanting to kind of rethink about transit, also don't forget about the technology needs that a lot of our smaller systems, especially rural systems, they would love to have it. There's systems out there. It's just cost prohibitive for them. And so that's great to have all bus fleets, but reality, it's going to be a good technology that can pair with your health systems, that can pair and get to that more on-demand service that the riders are going to eventually be expecting as we move from one generation to another.
Just to follow up on that, that's a great point, Carl. I think part of the messaging needs to be that this isn't your parents' bus, this isn't your parents' bus fleet. What's happening in the bus transit space is revolutionary. This hasn't been seen before in terms of the EV buses, yes, but all of the safety, the apps, the connectivity, the Wi-Fi. There's so much stuff happening in the bus transit space, and we need to make sure that the members and the staff understand that, because it is an equipment need as well, and it's going to just improve the customer service. It's going to improve the safety of your system, and the accessibility with apps and all the like. You all are doing all of this, and members need to hear that as well, because buses can be cool, and that's part of the message that really resonates on the Hill. The buses are not the mobility choice of the past. It's really going to be the mobility choice of the future. And we need to make sure that there's a good argument for that.
We did an event, was that 2 years ago, Joel?
Yeah.
Where we brought some buses to the Capitol and invited the congressional members down for it. And just to show them what the new technology was and the kinds of things that were available. And they were surprised by what they saw, I believe.
Any other questions for Joel, Ed, or our leadership team here at IPTA?
Carl,
A bunch of people here. I can see. Go ahead, Ed.
are you going to talk about Monday's?
I will here. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Do we have any other more questions for Joel? Hearing none, we'll move forward. But yes, this has been kind of our Washington, D.C. kind of fly-in virtual event. We are also are having an event here on Monday at 2:15 Central. So we hope you guys can join that. That is going to be with our acting director, Fernandez, with FTA. We are going to just, again, talk a little bit about the transit needs. The message is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be more on, what is it we're needing from FTA in there. And so we'll be highlighting a few items with their continuing on with the single source application. But we hope you can make that. It shows a strong presence. Again, we are one of the few, I would say, rural states that actually goes and meets with FTA. I think if you can kind of tell by our recent grant awards, that makes a difference. And so, we were excited to fill up their whole conference room. I'd love to see another 30 individuals, just like I saw today here with Acting Director Fernandez. So we hope we can see you on Monday at 2:15.
And she's going to be the new director. They're going to nominate her. So this is our real opportunity for us to get in front of the new administrator for this new administration, because they're going big and bold. And I think we'll hear that on Monday.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you for your time. Giving up your morning to join us. It's been very valuable.
Carl, can I ask another question? I'm sorry, this is kind of for Joel and Ed as well. When Scott was talking about the low, no emissions and the electric buses for rural systems and how there might need to be like money just taken out of the whole low, no emission grant process and put some of that just so that rural systems are competing with rural systems. What is the Bus Coalition's stance on that?
We haven't taken a position on that, but there is, I'm pretty sure within the zero emission program, there's 2 tiers recognition of rural systems, that there is a requirement that larger systems would need to buy 10 buses at a time at the minimum, and rural systems would need to buy 5 at a time. I don't know if there's an actual funding preference or set aside for rural systems. So, but that is something that, it's worthy of discussion.
Yeah, clearly, I think our board is okay with that without any problem. The real goal of the Bus Coalition, the bottom line, is getting funds back for your capital programs.
Right.
We leave the other issues to APTA and CTAA, but we're usually very supportive of the work that they do. And we would be supportive, I'm sure, of the set aside for the rural areas that CTAA is asking for. I don't see a problem with that. Do you, Joe?
I don't think, I think we'd have to take it to the board, but I don't think it would be a significant issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Elizabeth is on that board, by the way. She's the vice president of the Bus Coalition now. That just happened.
Okay, that's great. She'll do a really great job.
Yeah, she will.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us, and also stay tuned. Excuse me. We're going to be sending out a state legislative update. We got some big things coming down in the state process, dealing with, unfortunately, the back bill is back with a tax bill that's out. We'll give an update on some of the CDL testing fees that have been going around, along with some other things. So stay tuned. We'll be getting that out shortly as well. But thank you so much for giving up your morning to be here. We can't do this without you. And I can tell you the awards that we've been receiving in the state of Iowa have been directly tied, I think, to events like this, and you guys participating. We sincerely appreciate it. Thank you for being a member. And other than that, have a great weekend. We'll hopefully see you.
Thank you, Carl, for leading. Carl, thank you for leading for IPTA, because you really do push us forward, and we appreciate that.
And happy
honor.
birthday.
Oh, and happy birthday, Carr.
Yes, it's what I love doing on my birthday. So we're in a meeting. Thank you guys. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
Monday.